This podcast is proud to be part of the TalkSport Fan Network. TalkSport. Powered by fans.
What a goal! It's absolutely world class from Marcus Tunde!
Johnson puts it in the air. Aidan Flynn wins the It's still with Lee Gregory. He's in the box, tries to screw him. Is it going to be there? Yes! Oh my word! The Wednesday week!
I tell you what, it's got better, hasn't it, since the last time you were here, Connor? There's a lot going on here, mate. The production value, as people have started to notice over the last couple of weeks, last couple of years, has got significantly better since we've been in League One, essentially. So, hello, welcome to another. Start again. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Wednesday Week. Hello from the Other Side edition. Today, joining me, I've got Connor Southwell. Connor, what outlet are you from nowadays? It's been a few years since we spoke, hasn't it?
Yes, I'm from the EDP, so the Eastern Daily Press, Norwich Evening News, and the Pinkin, which is kind of the sports arm of those local newspapers. So yeah, covering Norwich City, and that's the best way. But I spread myself about.
Well, I'm glad you're freelancing, bro. I'm glad you're doing something to do. So Connor's come to join us to talk about the upcoming game against Norwich City in. There's a lot going on. There's a lot happening, mate. I've not pre-warned Connor about any of this, ladies and gents. So Connor, listen, midweek game coming up against Norwich. I mean, how's your season faring compared to ours? I mean, everybody's having a great time compared to us, unless you're Rotherham United. So, tell us a little bit about this season and last from the Canaries' perspective.
Yeah, so as you can tell from that, I think that maybe reveals it. It's interesting because you look at it on paper. Norwich are 3 points off the top six. You would probably expect the mood to be okay, maybe even pretty good, but it's just not. And I think that maybe is a reflection of a few years of malaise and just kind of where the football club is at the moment. But there's not a lot of optimism around, to be completely honest with you, which again, I know kind of contrasts and sounds a bit silly from the position that you guys are in and Rotherham are in and others are in. But it's all about context when you speak about these things, I think. And it's been 18 months or so since Norwich City were relegated from the Premier League. I think they've finished 13th in the Championship last season, which is incredibly difficult to do with parachute payments, I think, at this level now. They've made poor decisions. They've recruited poorly. They've made poor decisions in terms of head coaches. They've kind of opened disconnect with supporters and ill will and poor feeling. And yeah, it's just not a really great place. Carrow Road's not a great place to watch football. I'm sure yourself and other Sheffield Wednesday fans, when they think of Carrow Road, will think of it as being always full. Come what may, there's always, and that's not been the case this season. There's been empty seats. There's a lot of apathy around. There's a lot of frustration around as well. There were some recent comments from Delia Smith and Michael Wynne-Jones that have kind of amplified that to an extent. So yeah, it's not great, to be honest, and that's really intriguing, but also been quite sad to kind of cover, if I'm being honest. So yeah, I think there's as I say to every kind of opposition fan I speak to, there's a real chance, I think, for teams that come to Carrow Road now, because if you get the first goal, the crowd turns, then I think there's a real possibility that you leave Carrow Road with, if not 3 points, then definitely a single point.
That's interesting. It's one of those where you sit there thinking, oh, how the other half live. Look at you in your top half, 3 points off your playoffs. I mean, surely this apathy that you mentioned must have been confounded a little bit by the Tractor Boys having such a good season as well.
Yeah, I don't think that helps. And of course, eagle-eyed Sheffield Wednesday fans will know that on Saturday, Norwich head to Ipswich. So I think in many ways, this game it's not a distraction, but it kind of is. And that, yeah, like you say, Ipswich doing well doesn't help, because Norwich have, I think it's 14 years now since Ipswich last beat Norwich, 12 games. It's kind of been the norm. And I think this time there's probably the expectation that they will win and not just win, but probably win quite handsomely. And that is a really horrible thought. And like you say, it doesn't help. But I think all I would say on the kind of 3 points thing is that I think that's more a reflection on the Championship than it is on Norwich City. I know there's kind of this big band of teams, isn't there, between about 6th and 21st, and it's separated by 9 points. So how much that actually means, I don't know, because Norwich certainly haven't been performing as a top 6 side this season. Particularly the last 2 home games, which is a 1-0 win against QPR, where they were very, very fortunate. They had 1 shot on target, and QPR had most of the ball, but put their boots on the wrong way around, I think, on that particular occasion, and subsequently have gone on to win 3 games in a row, which is not a surprise to anybody. And then 0-0 on Saturday against Preston, where Preston came and put a load of men behind the ball, and Norwich really struggles to break them down. So it's not been great to watch. It's not a very good squad. It's quite imbalanced. There's lots of flaws of it, and yeah, I would say don't be fooled by how close Norwich City are to the playoffs at this moment in time, because their performances have not been great at all.
That's interesting, and to be fair, that's probably why we do this show, because I don't know if anybody else has found this, but when you try and talk about somebody else's team on a certain team's podcast, nobody else really gives a shit, and it's quite, I genuinely find that interesting, because coming up tomorrow night as we're recording this, we've got Norwich City, and we're on a bit of a bounce right now. Our new manager has used the international break very well. We seem to be playing better football. We've even got off the bottom from where we were under our initial manager from the start of the season in Xisco Munoz. So, given on what you're saying there must be an element of doubt in this upcoming fixture.
Yeah, I think the way Norwich are looking at it is probably an unhelpful game before that East Anglia Derby. As I said, ideally, you'd probably want a clear week. You'd probably want to, I don't know, try and slip an extra man onto the pitch at Portman Road and hope that nobody notices. It's kind of in that territory. So I think the way I would look at it is definitely a potential banana. I know people hate that phrase, but a potential banana skin for Norwich, but probably also a game that the fans don't really want at this moment in time. Whether the players and David Wagner feel that way, I'm not sure, because there is also an element, of course, of playing on it, not to get all Jurgen Klopp, but playing a Wednesday night and then playing on a Saturday lunchtime. So whether that comes into the thinking as well. So yeah, it's a little bit of a hindrance, I think, and that's kind of how it's being viewed. And whether that helps Sheffield Wednesday or not, we'll obviously see. But I don't think it can do you guys any harm coming to Carrow Road, because a lot of people who will be attending the game tomorrow night won't be thinking about that game. They'll be thinking about the next one, and that sometimes can be really dangerous.
And that's what I'm hearing there, Connor. So what you're telling me right now is that you're going to play all the reserves just to prep for the big game at the weekend, and we might come in and steal a few points. I heard it. I heard you say it. So, I tell you what. Let's talk about that game against Preston. Here's your on the screen now. Is your lineup that you played against Preston, and I found even at the early part of the season when we played them at Hillsborough, they were very robust. They were very difficult to break down. Didn't score a million goals, but it was only a 1-0 loss given how terrible we were at the time. How did you find Preston, and what sort of changes are we going to be looking at? But like I say, you can only speculate given that the big game at the weekend, right?
Yeah, exactly that. I to be honest, and speaking to David Wagner today as I have, I don't anticipate him bringing the changes and playing a load of 18-year-olds. I don't think that will be the way he approaches it. Whether he makes some changes to that 11, I don't know. I think, for example, someone like Onel Hernandez there, who hasn't scored a home goal now for 4 years, is someone who's taking quite a bit of criticism. Likewise, on the other wing, Christian Fashnat, you've got John Rowe, who's had a little bit of an injury. Whether they decide to start him or save him for Saturday, I think is one for debate. You can obviously see Kenny McLean there, who is not a central defender, playing as a central defender, and that is largely because Norwich have lost Ben Gibson, who was their only left sort of footed centre back, and they were playing Danny Bart and a young lad called Jaden Warner, and they weren't getting the same qualities in possession. So David Wagner's kind of favoured playing Kenny McLean there, and whether that suits what Sheffield Wednesday will do or not, but I think it's clear that there's an area there to be targeted. And I think Norwich's left side in general is one. What he does with the strikers as well. Adam Eder has scored the most goals of anybody in the Championship coming off the bench, but when he started has been a little bit less effective and kind of thrives off when teams play a high line and there's loads of space to run into. Ashley Barnes has just come back from an injury, but has looked pretty ineffective since he's come back. So I think there's a possibility for lots of changes in lots of areas, if I'm honest. And on Preston, you're right. I think they came to Carrow Road on the back of 3 defeats. David Wagner said he was a little bit surprised by how they were set up. I wasn't necessarily. They essentially played a back 5, 4 centre backs, all six 6+. I don't think their fullbacks or wing backs got across the halfway line, and they still couldn't nick the game 1-0. They hit the bar. They had a chance late on from a corner. There was a volley that they flashed over. So you compare kind of the clear-cut chances. Norwich only had 4 shots on target. One of those was a miss from Liam Gibbs, which was scandalous, really, how he missed that. So it actually could have gone either way, I would say, but Norwich had a lot of the ball. David Wagner is expecting Sheffield Wednesday to play a little bit differently, so whether he sets up a little bit differently. But for me, that the key thing is what he does around Kenny McLean, because that he's kind of, the way he's kind of framed it is against teams where he would expect to have a lot of the ball. Kenny McLean is excellent for those type of games. In games where maybe there's a little bit more of a threat, they might look to maybe put in Danny Bart, look to win those first contacts, and then have Kenny McLean kind of sniffing around the second ball. So I think you can read in a lot of what Norwich City will attempt to do tomorrow night based on whether Kenny McLean will be starting as a centre-back or not.
Interesting one, because we know Danny Bart as a player and I've just realised it's about 12 years ago when we used to have him.
He's played for everyone in the Championship.
He has now, yeah, I suppose. But back then, he was absolutely jacked. He helped us get promoted out of League One again. And he was huge. It got into his bodybuilding. He was massive, and for League One football, it really, it's really what they needed. And then during his time with, I think it was Stoke, wasn't it, before he signed for you guys, and that sort of time, he'd got himself into more of a lean shape. What type of player is Bart nowadays? Because before he was a big old bruiser, but you don't lose that weight unless you want to start running, right?
That's true. Yeah, to be honest, we've not seen that much of him. Norwich signed him very, very, very late on deadline day, to the point where they had to get a 15-minute extension to confirm the deal, and he was kind of frantically ringing people up saying, "Is it gone through? Have I signed? Have I signed?" Because they lost on Andrew Omobamidele quite late to Nottingham Forest for a sum of money, significant or not, depending on who you speak to. And so they had to kind of scramble a little bit. So I think he was kind of imposed on David Wagner. We've got to a stage where Shane Duffy was suspended a couple of weeks ago. He played for a couple of games. So Norwich won at Cardiff. He played there and had a very good game. Then played in that QPR win where he kept a clean sheet. And then a defeat at Watford where Norwich went 2-0 up. He scored in actually from a corner, and then they kind of threw away a 2-goal lead. And but the QPR game, I think maybe showed his limitations in terms of on the ball, and that's been maybe the big issue that David Wagner identified. They're defenders that were making individual errors too costly. They were getting caught in transition, and he's kind of paid the price for that a little bit. Hasn't played as well in the last 2 games, and has been favoured for a central midfielder. You're never in a good place, I think, as a central defender when that happens. So to be honest, I think he's probably looking around wondering why on earth he made the move from Sunderland at this stage, because he hasn't had a lot of football. He's kind of been overlooked, and now there are defenders coming back. Ben Gibson should be back in training next week. Grant Hanley even sooner, but I think both of those guys will maybe take a little bit longer. So he's probably going to move pretty quickly to 4th choice centre back, which is never a good place to be. So leaner definitely. I'd say old fashioned in terms of head it, kick it, not much else, which is fine. But when you want to play out from the back, it's not ideal. And when you want to play, as David Wagner does, a pretty high line, to have a centre-back pairing of Danny Bart, 33, 34, and Shane Duffy, who's 31, not really ideal. So they've kind of moved away from that and are trying Kenny McLean there. But I think there's still some scepticism about whether Kenny McLean can stand up to a real physical battle. And not sure in games against Bristol City and against Preston, who, as we said, showed really little ambition to come to Carrow Road and attack, whether those tests can really be can really be kind of passed. But I think the fear is that Norwich go into that derby on Saturday, and he's not really been tested. He gets thrown in there against one of the Championship's best attacks and gets annihilated, and that's not really the time where you want to be seeing whether or not he can live with that kind of thing. So in a weird kind of way, it would be nice if he got a bit more of a test tomorrow night to maybe see that if he is deployed in that position.
Wow. Let's talk briefly, just before we wrap this up. Let's talk briefly about David Wagner, because I've just realised how long it's been. We've been out of the game a little bit in terms of what I knew about Norwich when I started to look around and what in terms of research. And we're a long way from Farker and Pookie and 30-yard screamers from Forestieri and all the rest of it. But one thing that I would like to settle once and for all is how good a manager is actually David Wagner. He got Huddersfield promoted by playing anti-negative football. Went through the playoffs, not scoring a goal, I think, and then ended up in the Premier League. And they subsequently let him go. And then since then, he's going to turn into Danny Bart. But I think in the next 5 years, he's going to have managed all of the Championship clubs at some point. But I can't seem to work out where he sits. Is he up there with Neil Warnock, or is he down there with Xisco Munoz? I can't seem to work out where he is on the scale. Was it an exciting proposition for you guys to get him when he turned up?
Not really. I think that's fair to say, and I think probably the question that you've asked there is a lot of the question a lot of the Norwich fans are asking themselves. He's been in post now, well, since January when he replaced Dean Smith, who was someone who didn't enjoy a very good relationship with supporters at all, and was heavily criticised for his style of play. Again, Norwich were in the top 6 when they sacked him last Christmas, but performances were really poor, and they've probably regressed even further under Wagner. I think that's fair to say. He was, again, it feels quite harsh saying some of this stuff, but I think compared to, you look at Alex Neil losing his job, and over the last 10 games, Norwich City have taken the exact same number of points as Stoke have. Tony Mowbray lost his job. Well, Norwich have taken 1 point fewer than Sunderland have taken over the last 10 games. He had a run of 4 defeats on the spin. You're very fortunate now as a manager if you go through that spell and you survive. And I think there's still a lot of Norwich fans who would like to see a change, and that's probably reflective of maybe what he hasn't done over the last 10, 12 months or so, really, which is not really establish a style of play. And there's been a lot of contradiction in his reign. So he spoke a lot about wanting to play a high octane, high pressing style, and then Norwich in the summer went and signed a load of players who were 30 or above. They've got 11 players now who are 30 or above, and 7 of those are contracted beyond this season. And then just a couple of weeks ago, Norwich have changed sporting director. There's a new guy who's come in. He says the squad's too old, and suddenly David Wagner's going, yeah, the squad is too old. It's like, well, you helped build it in the summer.
You're the reason for that, pal.
Exactly. So I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about long term, about whether he can fit. I think at the moment the school of thought seems to be from internally, from Norwich's perspective, we've got an old squad. He can manage an old squad, and then maybe if we want to change that later on down the line, then maybe we'll look to change him. He's on a 12-month rolling contract, so there's not that much security there. But I think the way I would sum it up is if he got dismissed tonight, if there was a statement saying David Wagner's left Norwich City, I think there would probably be more people in favour of that than weren't. And I think that's when you're in that place as a manager, it's very hard to get out of. So yeah, underwhelmed. And I think the final point I would make on this is there is maybe this kind of perception that when Stuart Webber was at the club, because of the two of them worked together at Huddersfield, got Huddersfield up, dismissed Dean Smith, in comes David Wagner. And I think there's always been this narrative of, well, you just appointed your mate, which is basically kind of followed him round until he departed about 2 weeks ago. Norwich now have a new sporting director, Ben Napper, who's arrived from Arsenal. And again, now the narrative is, well, this isn't your guy. You didn't appoint this guy. And so he's been maybe a little bit unlucky with kind of what he's walked into and the changes above him. But yeah, Norwich have regressed significantly over the last 2 years on and off the pitch. And it's difficult to know how they kind of move away from this without moving away from David Wagner. And I think that's the challenge that he has the long term. And, as we mentioned, if he becomes the first Norwich manager to lose to Ipswich since 2009, it's not going to do him any favours.
I think that'll be a nail in his coffin, and especially when you've got people like Alex Neil and Mowbray available now. And I know, like, I heard a really interesting debate on the radio earlier on that, like, they were talking about David Moyes, and they said that David Moyes is an established Premier League manager. He's a manager in the Premier League. Whether you like him, whether you don't, that man has managed in the Premier League, and that's what he is. But people tend to think that the sexy appointment are these German managers, these Spanish managers that come over and they're young and they've learnt a different school of football, and that's the sexy option. But whereas sometimes it doesn't always work. Now, for Wagner, 6 years ago it worked, and I feel like he's been dining out on that ever since, without any real CV succession moving forward, right?
Yeah, it's a bit. I mean, what I would compare it to is Paul Lambert at Norwich, two promotions, and has really struggled everywhere else he's been. It's very similar. Sometimes the stars can align and things can work at one place that have no reason to work but do work, and there's no real science behind it. And I think that there is maybe an element of that, because at Schalke, at Young Boys, at Norwich, he's probably really struggled to recapture that success. He could go on and get Norwich City promoted, but at the moment, it probably doesn't feel like that's especially likely. And I think at the moment, it just kind of feels like he's maybe exactly that, a safe pair of hands. He'll get you into mid-table, maybe not beyond that. He has to now prove with, again, a pretty imperfect squad that he can do better than that. But it feels like that is kind of the view that is forming around him. And I think that's also an element for him, which is like, if he does lose his job at Norwich, where does he go after that with what's happened subsequently from Huddersfield? I'm not quite sure.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Connor, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Thanks a lot, ladies and gents. Connor Southall.